We get this question often. Like, who are we here at Watershed? Somebody will say, well, I've heard this Watershed place. Well, tell me about it. Well, I don't know. It's kind of this, it's kind of that. And then you ask somebody else, and they give you a different perspective. And they say, well, it's kind of this and kind of that. And some people say whatever they want about it. And there's this sort of hodgepodge of who we are. And to be honest, it's been something that's been challenging for us as a staff for a lot of years, because the moment we sort of land in this space of we think this is us, we continue to find ourselves shifting and morphing, as many of you do as well. But today, if you were to say, who is Watershed? We've come to this sort of assumption that most of us in this space, if I had to come up with a term or a phrase that I could take the liberty of coining you as, and again, some of you I don't know, but most of you whom I do know, this seems to be illustrative of you, I would say that you are a post-churched person. I speak to many of you who come out of the evangelical strand of the church. You will say you're a post-evangelical. We have a huge Catholic presence here. You often tell me you're an ex-Catholic or you're a post-Catholic. So this language of post-church seems to be quite fitting for us. And invariably, a post-church person for us consists of two ilks. First one being, many of you come into this space and you have done some kind of work that has allowed you to ask some questions in a previous world, in a previous maybe context, and asking those questions forced you to go down this rabbit hole of kind of what we call deconstructing all these assumed thoughts that you've once held to, and it might have been a year or two or 3 or 4 journey, but what happened is you asked so many questions, and the places that you came from did not only not like those questions, it scared them that you were asking those questions. It forced them to have to reconcile some stuff which they don't want to do. And so they either asked you to leave or you just felt like it was appropriate time to kind of move on. And you show up one day here with those questions still looming, with this longing that maybe there might be a community here that would be willing to hold those questions in tension. And better yet, maybe a community here that would be able to say, well, not only do you have to continue to fall down this sort of slippery slope of deconstructing and letting a whole bunch of stuff go, but actually you can rebuild, you can reconstruct. Because I'm pretty convinced you're here today, not just because maybe the Sunday morning experience is relatively okay, and maybe you're not even here just because of good community. For most of you, you still have this assumption and this belief that God is out there and he or she is worthy of pursuit. And that pursuit is transformative. And you're looking for a place that gives you filters and constructs and ideas that might work for you, and also a place that says, actually, I've got a different set of filters, and can I let my filters and my containers be in this space as well? And I, as one of the influencers, say, absolutely. And so in this space this morning, many of you post-churched people sit here who have deconstructed and reconstructed, or have broken things down and have rebuilt things. That's one group of person. And the other group of unchurched or post-churched person here today is the person who says, for whatever reason, the experience that I had in my previous religious experience was so painful. There was such angst, there was such hurt that the pastor this or the leader this or something happened where you gave your soul and your heart to it, and it felt like they kind of just broke it in half. And in doing so, you left so deeply broken that you just needed to find a place to heal. And for this place, this place has been a respite for you. And it happens all the time. And you show up and we say things like, just be here. Just heal. Just sit in a space like you just did a few moments ago, where Austin is inviting you back into a place of rest and peace. He's inviting you back into a place of liberation. And so as we navigate this next 8 weeks, I'm really excited about this series that we're on, because what we're going to do is give you, as far as we know, these are like the top 8 things, the top 8 variables, these tools, these resources, these experiences, these sort of like a hook on the wall to hang who you are on a little bit, because we feel as though these 8 components of our journey of late have been central to our discovery. And so this series, Planes of Progressive Faith, we're going to address 8 of them specifically. And I'm not naive enough to think there's just 8. There's probably 10 or 12, or maybe there's only 6. I don't know. You can look at it however you want. But for us today, in this current experience, we want to give you 8 sort of chunks, categories that we can play with. So I remember I was 34 years old, about maybe 14 years ago, and I was standing before a dissertation committee, and I was petrified. I'd been in school for 30 years at this point. I didn't like school. I wasn't good at it. It became really hard for me. I was tired of textbooks. Textbooks are really boring books, very different than maybe a good, and I'm a relative avid reader, and I love to read, but I felt like I was just filling my mind with data, but nothing really transformative. The papers, the whole deal, the whole system, the whole academy, I was just done with it. And for some of you, it's awesome, but for me, I was ready to be done with it. Standing before my dissertation committee, I gave my spiel, I defended my dissertation, and they poked holes in it. They asked me different questions about it, and they finally said, congratulations, you've passed, or whatever language they used. And I was so thrilled, I was so glad to be done that I didn't even go to my graduation because it was over. I had this massive sense of liberation. It was done. No more exams, no more tests, nothing. I was done in that system. I remember dating, although it was like 17, 18, 20 years ago. But I remember dating, again, before social media, so I can't even begin to imagine what it was like dating in the world of social media. But invariably, and maybe this happened for you, you start dating somebody and you're in the throes of it, like 3 or 4 weeks in, and you begin to realize, man, I don't think I want to be in this. You have those moments, right? And you're with this person, and they're really nice. They got a ton of friends. Everybody loves this person. You even made the mistake of meeting their parents 2 weeks in. So now you know their family, and you're sitting here saying, I don't want this anymore. And you can't figure out how to exit this thing well. Maybe you throw in a fight to kind of mess it up, and that doesn't mess it up. He or she's too nice and responsive. And here you are, you find yourself on a Friday night at 10 o'clock after the date, and the whole night you've been trying to figure out, how can I say this, and how can I say this nicely? This person is way too sweet. I don't deserve them, all those kind of things. And you finally make this statement, it's really me, it's not you, all those kind of things. And you let the person go, and either one of two responses happen. Either they cry and they run out of the car, or they debate you on it and want to know why you're letting them go. Either way is relatively torturous until you finally go home that night. And there is this sense of liberation. You're free from it until the next person you date a month later, right? So it's this vicious cycle. Then, or maybe you remember, I think it was around 2012, the Arab uprising. And this language of freedom, this language of liberation was all over the news media. There was this sense that the world was rooting for these countries and the people of these countries as the dictators were falling one by one. And it was this really neat experience. And although obviously it hasn't all turned out perfectly, nonetheless, this sense of liberation was profound, and it was something that we all celebrated and longed for. It seems intuitive, internal to us, that we experience bouts of liberation and freedom. Wouldn't it also be intuitive that we could assume that when we engage God, when we engage faith, spirituality, the church, that liberation should be at the center of it, at the core of it? That we should find ourselves waking up to new kinds of freedoms, not these senses of being enslaved. And for many of us, the church has not been a freeing place. It's not been a liberating place. It's been an enslaving place. Yet the irony of it is, the narrative of the Scriptures is very much that we've been invited into freedom. Paul writes in Galatians 5, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbors as yourself." Earlier in Galatians 1, Paul says a similar context. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. We go back several hundred years to Isaiah, the prophet of Israel, and he says, "The Spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release of darkness for the prisoners." That's central to the Jewish consciousness, to the Jewish story, is this idea of being enslaved by Egypt and then ultimately being set free. It is the core of much of the Old and the New Testament. What does it mean to be liberated? And so I want to ask you 2 specific questions. First one is, what is it about your spiritual journey that is or was enslaving for you? So, for example, in my life, I can remember being a part of a church early on, And church is really good about giving out rules. And then if you broke those rules, then they would induce guilt. And what it did is, in a sort of a jacked up way, it tied you deeper into the system because you looked to the system sort of for affirmation. And so there was this sense of you're not being free. You're actually you're not being free. You're actually being guilted and you're being enslaved. Second question: what is it about your spiritual journey you actually find liberating? Hopefully there's some answers to this. I know for me, one of the answers, if the question were posed to me today, is I don't have to have all the answers. Now, it was really cocky for me to assume somehow I thought I ever had all the answers. I never really thought I had them, but I was often on the pursuit of trying to figure out as much content as possible because I had to be the bearer of that content to you all. That was the assumption that in my previous context I would have assumed or understood, but now with a sense of freedom, I can be in this with you. I can learn from you, from your experiences. You inform me. Hopefully I can do the same for you, and we grow in that journey together. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the next 90 seconds, 3 minutes, somewhere right in there, and I want you to suspend judgment. And I'm assuming in your mind, when you read these questions, there's a quick thought, quick statement, quick sentence that comes to mind to you. I'm going to invite the guys to bring the lights up just a little bit. And I know this is awkward because you got to talk to somebody in church, but I'm going to invite you to turn to each other, a couple people, whatever, and maybe answer this question to each other. All right, so you go. All right, so here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to get extra courageous. I know for some of you it was really hard stepping out and talking to a stranger this morning, but I'm going to invite you to get a little extra courageous. And Desmond and Austin got a couple mics in the back, and I'm going to ask that same question. Those of you that might say, all right, I'm willing to kind of just share like the 20-second response to that. I don't want anything longer than that. But what is it about your spiritual journey that was enslaving? What is it about your spiritual journey that's actually liberating? And could you respond to both those questions quickly? Let me see hands for those that want to speak to that. Oh, don't act like you're shy. Don't get that shy. Yeah, there's a hand. I see a hand back there. Can we give us your name, please, on that mic?
I'm Lynn. Hi.
Hi, Lynn.
It's funny, we were talking the enslaving piece. I didn't really feel like I had that experience. My mom was very spiritually open-minded, and we did go to a Methodist church, and that was really for my dad, because those were his strong beliefs. And I guess the only thing that felt enslaving as a kid was the having to go, but I thought it was fun, and I liked to sing, and so awesome. To me it was, I enjoyed church.
That's awesome. You need to be up here.
Right?
That's awesome.
Okay.
Good, yeah.
I love that. The liberating piece, I think, is the fact that you have the freedom to come here and absorb what you can from your message, and then I can go meditate, and I can study my yoga philosophy, and it's the freedom of thought and the freedom of belief, and that I don't owe explanations to anyone. You share ideas and take pieces from what other people believe.
What I have found in my experience to be kind of enslaving would be reliance on the rules. Yeah. This is how you have to live. This is what you have to do. If not, you're wrong. There's nothing else to it. Yeah. And with that being said, what I find liberating is actually having a relationship with God and knowing that He's a Father, He's my Heavenly Father, and knowing that we make those mistakes, and that at the end of the day, like a perfect parent would, they'll still take their child home.
Yeah, well said. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much for that.
For me, I grew up in church all my life, and so for me, going to church was, you have to have the right rules, the right philosophy, the right doctrine. That was the right version of the Bible. Yeah. Like, that was all part of what I grew up in. And also, you go to church and you put on your mask. You don't show who you are. You show the picture of who you want people to think that you are. Well, you wear your Sunday clothes. Mm-hmm. You don't talk about things you're struggling with. If your marriage is struggling or anything like that, you don't talk about that. And so for me, what I found most liberating coming to Watershed was just that you could be vulnerable, you could, not put on a face and just show who you are and what you're dealing with, and that's beautiful and perfect, and we're all on the journey together, and it's not about perfection, it's about growing together and being real and coming together as a community to help each other.
Thank you for sharing. That's awesome.
So the church that I was a part of was very evangelical, very be a shining example, and like what you were saying, very doctrinally based, and this is the right way to be a Christian, and the constant pressure of having to perform in front of people to say, oh, this is what you're supposed to be like, or maybe even a pressure to have to invite them to church, or pressure in your own mind to want them to be a Christian. But, and the other side of that, just putting on a new lens in life and just seeing people for who they are and where they are, and that just because they haven't been baptized into my church doesn't mean they're any less of a person in any way. So that was definitely refreshing, and not having to accept the Bible in its entirety of the literal postmodern sense that we take it, that, you know, these rules are set in place and it's literal, and all these things that were just so binding and that I found self-conflicting. So
Absolutely.
The big thing for me growing up that I've sort of realized in hindsight, that growing up in the church, and my dad was a pastor and I was an only child, so there was a lot of pressure to sort of be a certain way, and that was fine, and I loved that, and sure, the attention was cool from like the old ladies and all that stuff, but I've realized in hindsight that kind of in that space and with faith around all the time, I felt that I was hindered in being able to kind of discover who I was, kind of my secular self, for lack of a better term. Things as simple as like, what's my favorite color? What weather do I like? What season do I like the best? That even now, like in my late 20s and 30s, that now I've been able to feel comfortable discovering about myself that I felt that I couldn't earlier, because I was trying so hard to be the, quote, right person. I need to be somebody that has a leather-bound journal and write down my favorite verses and like the margins and all that stuff. I tried very hard to make that work, but that wasn't me, and I think that weighed down on other areas of life too. That now being able to explore other areas of faith, I can also feel more comfortable in discovering who I am as a whole person.
One of the things that was interesting, I sensed in the first service, and I don't know if this is true for you all, that many of you who have gone through this journey where you felt like you've left a tribe, you left a group, because maybe you've reset in how you see things, that you're no longer welcome to a whole group of people in your past, maybe even your families. Is that true for some of you guys? True, yeah. I see that. So I want to take us down a little bit of the journey. I want to give you a roadmap to what I think many of you are speaking to this morning. So a week ago or whatever, Taryn and I, we had just left Yoga One over here, wherever it is, and we were coming under Independence to go home at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it was hot and windows down, and it was still too early to talk too much, and I went underneath the bridge, and I heard, because we were underneath the bridge, I heard my wheel clicking, click, 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 and wasn't sure what was going on, but we were going on a trip the next day, and we had to get this thing healed, and so all of a sudden now we began strategizing how we could get my car to the place it needed to go, and now we only had one car that day, but we both needed to be at different places, and we had kids that needed to be different places, and it was going to be a total chaotic day. And something that was relatively significant, a vehicle, but was insignificant because we weren't even thinking of it. It was just a part of our day-to-day. We weren't giving it any real sense of weight. All of a sudden now, this thing was ruling the day. It was controlling our lives. And I think for many of us, we navigate our spiritual journey a little bit the same way. It kind of sits in our hip pocket. It's there. We might show up at church. You might nod at somebody speaking on a Sunday. You might jump into a small group randomly. You might write a check here and there. You might get involved once in a while. But at the end of the day, it's really not meaningful until something goes awry. And your life somehow falls apart, a marriage or a relationship or your health or a job or something. You have this crisis, and you go and re-engage, or you go and engage the faith that you've been told is supposed to fix everything or sustain you, and it doesn't. And all of a sudden now, you're beginning to ask all these questions, like, should I keep this truck? Is it going to be worth investing into? Will it get us to the destination we need to go to? Will the scriptures and the stories of the Bible really meet the needs that I've been told they will meet? Will God provide for me like I've been told He will? After all, I do all the right things. I jump through the right hoops. I say all the right things. And now when I am in this time of need, you begin questioning whether or not the system is going to work for you. And then you begin to engage it, and you quickly realize it does not live up to your expectations. And then you begin a journey. And that journey invariably starts out with something really, really small. You might be too early to say, I'm not giving up on God yet, because I clearly don't want to give up on God. I still love God, but I'm not sure the infrastructure or the containers that I've been given are going to satiate the needs that I have, or maybe at a more baseline, the structures that I've been given fundamentally never work for anybody. We all are just living with a bunch of smoke and mirrors. And so you ask the hard questions, and you begin finding yourself moving along in the journey. I remember I was 10 years old, and we were going to this really strict church. All the rules, you couldn't go to movies. Women had to wear dresses. I looked like I worked for IBM at 10 years old. I had to wear a suit every freaking time I went to church. It was ridiculous. And we went to a different church at 10. My family went through some turmoil, some pain, some difficulty. We realized the car wasn't working really well, and we had to reset some things. We went to a different church, and that different church was freeing in really one way. The rules were less. They released the tension of all those things that we had to live up to. We didn't have all the same kinds of rules, because in this current context, we could then go to movies. We could wear jeans and T-shirts. Right? We could listen to rock music, for lack of a better term. And so what began to happen is we released these rules that we initially held to, and we really just took on another set of rules. It's this first chunk of the journey most of us find ourselves on. And it starts to feel really good when you're in that place of releasing rules. I mean, it felt kind of free, actually. Because after all, I was no longer bounded to these sets. But you find yourself still living in that space, and you begin to realize, I've released rules, but I just took on other sets of rules. Maybe rules that were a little bit more freeing, but nonetheless, there were still rules. And the journey of liberation was beginning, because I began to realize that the next step that I need to take on was not about releasing rules, but it was about releasing beliefs and practices. And this right here is a massive leap. Most of us never go to this space. I argue most of you have, or you wouldn't be here this morning. But most of us in the faith system will never move to this space. All we do is really live in that first square where we're just kind of playing with different rules. It's a rules game. Some rules are more freeing, some churches are more freeing, or some synagogues or religious institutions are more freeing than others. But at the end of the day, it's just a rules conversation. Where when we go to this next space, we begin to deconstruct and we release beliefs and practices. And it does not feel like it's a space of liberation in this place, because what you begin to feel is really a loss, not liberation. I mean, after all, you are letting go of the largest infrastructural worldview that you potentially hold to, this idea of faith in God, and all the sort of the pillars holding that up, they begin to crumble and fall aside, and you're sitting here saying, well, I don't know, if that's the largest, most valuable component of how I see life, even my family and my finances and my career and all the other things that are sort of sub-categorical to the idea of faith in God in your life, those two become questionable. And the whole thing starts to unravel. And it is a scary place to be, because if the filter for you was that God fixes your needs in a previous context, here in this space you begin to realize, well, maybe God does not fix all my needs, at least through the perspective that I was told he's supposed to fix all my needs. And so you find yourself in this tailspin a little bit, questioning everything, and people tell you, no, be careful, it's a slippery slope, and it is a slippery slope, and I'm here to say, go. I mean, ride it, because in my past, 6 years ago, I began experiencing the slippery slope, and it scared the crap out of me. I was petrified. I lost all faith in so many things. But what I found in it was I had community and people around me who said, but this thing does not have to continue to fall. There is a point where you can reconstruct. There is a point when you can redevelop. There is a point when you can reconform. And initially it feels you leaving a little bit empty, because all you're doing in this place is letting stuff go, and you're not sure what you hold on to anymore. And this really can be a dark place of the soul. I mean, after all, you might have spent decades engaged in this. I had a meeting on Friday in this room right next door to us here with a couple in their late 60s. He's a former pastor. She's a therapist. She's an elder at her church, and they are full-blown in this process of deconstructing. Of course, their church doesn't know about it, and here they are, almost 70 years of age. It's scaring them because their worldviews, their lives for decades have been held under these really the space of releasing rules. That was where they thought they were kind of progressing. All they were doing is really kind of moving rules around. But in the last few years, they began releasing beliefs and practices, and now they sat in that space scared. I literally said it was like with the sense of it is okay, and I promise you, you will be fine, and there is a journey to be had. There is a discovery to be had. But in that second space, it's about letting go. It's about letting go of maybe categories in terms of how you see God. It's about letting go of sexuality conversation. It's the LGBTQ conversation for many of you. And that's scary because the backgrounds you come from are not very welcoming in that narrative. But then there's this next space. And this to me is where the hope begins to lie. And this is, again, a space that only a few people are willing to go down. As you progress in this developmental journey, most people live to the very sort of left of it, I guess, to the left of it, and find very few are actually willing to move along. In this third category, in this third chunk, this is where you discover new beliefs and practices. This is where you wake up to the idea of reconstructing. This is where it's a scary, unknown story, but nonetheless, this is where you find energy knowing that you have new practices and new beliefs to potentially play with. This is where maybe for some of you during Austin's song set with us, where he invited us into this meditative space, you thought, oh, I shouldn't touch that. Man, I'm emptying up my mind. That's Buddhist philosophy. Satan's going to enter my mind and I'm going to be ruined. No, actually, that is a very Christian narrative. That is a very Jewish narrative. The Psalms invites us into meditation. Oh, but that stuff comes from the East. Well, so does Christianity and Judaism, for the record. So this whole thing is a practice that's been around for thousands of years, of which it is your tradition, and it is okay to engage it. But in our previous context, people don't want us to play there. But here we're saying, well, let's play, let's discover. What can we learn in this? Are there new ways for us to experience faith? Are there new practices? Are there new beliefs? And of course, the belief conversation, man, there's so much to talk about. There's so many new containers with which we can begin to play. And this right here is a journey that we have not mastered here at Watershed, but it is a journey that we feel really comfortable playing with you and with others. And what's been a lot of fun is more and more we are getting folks like yourself, the post-church, who are saying, I've got the containers from a previous context, and I'm redeveloping new containers so I can help other people in that process. And this is a really exciting place to be, because people are waking up not only to who they are, but to new ways and new grids and filters in terms of taking on God. So early on here at Watershed, I had a guy in my small group, in my block. His name was Jason, and this was like 10, 12 years ago. And invariably you sit in that space, he would sit in that space any given Sunday, and Jason was sort of the controller of truth, or so he thought. And so Jason would constantly correct somebody's miscorrect information. So somebody would say something about faith or God or the Bible or the book that we were reading, and quickly Jason would jump in and say, oh, no, that's wrong. The Bible here says do, and he would try to correct this person's or whoever was saying their statements, their beliefs. And I can remember several times I had to do this after our block meeting, after our small group meeting. I have to pull Jason aside, smack him around a few times, say, Jason, chill. You got to back it down. But for Jason, he was under this assumption that God's truth is the ultimate truth. And somehow, he had the access to all of God's truth, and maybe nobody else did. So he felt as though he had to correct other people's truths that didn't align with his. Because his worldview was God's truth will fix things. It has some kind of mystical power on stuff. So if I can get God's truth on top of false truth, people will then sort of convert away from their false truth and buy his supposed accurate truth. In 30 years of doing this, I've never seen it work that way. But that was the assumption that he held to, and that was a worldview that also has been taught to us over the years. That we have these grids, these filters, that we cannot somehow sit in a space with other people who see the world differently. And to me, this is the ultimate, the most challenging, the most difficult space to be, is to embody multiple beliefs and practices. To sit in a community where other people see the world maybe completely counter to you. And somehow you have this ability to be in that space and sit in it well and actually hear them, whether you agree or disagree or not. This is a space, this piece right here is why we will never be a church of 10,000 people. Because most people do not live in this fourth space. It is very, very challenging. It is very, very difficult. You have to do it with excessive intentionality. I have this friend of mine here, and she's been a part of this community almost since day one. And when we have very honest conversations, she's very apt to tell me that she does not align with a lot of things that I might say, or even some of the things that we might do in terms of practices around here. But she says again and again and again, all the time, but Scott, here's the deal. At the end of the day, I'm watching people's lives being wildly transformed here. People are waking up, relationships are happening that are really rich and meaningful, and it is worth me investing at the level that I do with my resources and time, whether I agree with everything that everybody is saying or not. This person has the ability to embody multiple beliefs and practices really well. She sits with this really well. This is something most of us will struggle with. This is something today at the 425 Panthers game that group will struggle with. As you see anybody who is a Dallas fan, they might be thrown over the edge or whatever it is, right? Because in sports, we don't do that well. But it's fun in sports. In our faith space, it's really important. Here at Watershed, it's excessively important that you're able to sit next to somebody, ask each other some really profound questions that are deep soul. I mean, those responses, that's a part of your soul. It's a part of your heart. That's deep stuff that when you share that, you have the ability to sit with that and hold those questions and hold those spaces. Because here's the learning that I'm falling into these days. One of our staffers said this word the other day, and I'm just going to steal it. The statement, they said, free people, free people. That people who are experiencing liberation, they want to bring other people into that freeing space. And that if you're sitting here today in a space where you're feeling like, man, I am so bound by so many assumptions. I have these tapes that are playing in my mind. I have these ideas of God that are restricting and not freeing. I invite you into saying, no, you let some of that go. Because most of the people in the space around you are okay with you letting that go. I said in preface a couple weeks ago, so I have this amazing privilege. Matt spends 5 weeks with people in preface, and then he allows me to come in that 6th week for no other reason, just to observe, just to see the kinds of people that we are seeing, for lack of a better term, graduate from that program. And I sit in there and knowing full well that there's tension often that happens those first 5 weeks in preface. Somebody might say something that somebody else in the group doesn't agree with. But what's happening is people are learning to share their different views, and they're doing it in relationship. They're doing it in community. By the time I get there, Matt's done all the hard work, I just get to see the response of how people are connecting with each other and waking up to each other and loving each other and sitting with complete different worldviews. So I wonder if this fourth space, I wonder if this embodying multiple beliefs and practices is not fundamentally what Jesus was inviting us into. Can I stop for a second and give you this sense that maybe Jesus was not trying to start another world religion? If you remember, after Jesus is gone, we have a whole bunch of different people who then canonize Jesus' words and start a whole other movement. Jesus was about embracing that which was around him. He was about saying, all right, Jews, that's good, but what about Gentile stuff? Okay, men, that's fine, you have that worldview, but what about a women's worldview? Oh, okay, Roman citizens, you have a worldview, but what about a non-Roman citizen worldview? That Jesus was the great sort of acceptor, the great person to bring people around him and say, is it possible that we can sit in a space with multiple beliefs and multiple practices? That if we as Christians, if you want to claim that terminology, if you claim that terminology, maybe the best part of it is, and it is truest to the core, is a community that is embracing of literally all. It is the tradition and the history that is more Jesus-like than I think some of the traditions that we've been brought up under. That Jesus is inviting us into experiencing liberation, and that those of us, or those of you who experience liberation at its highest form, are doing so when you have the ability to embody multiple beliefs and practices simultaneously. So I know this is not an easy journey, but man, it is fun. Sometimes it's really sexy. Sometimes it's really painful. Sometimes the loss seems intense. It feels like you're alone. It feels like your Thanksgiving dinners are not like they used to be because you can't talk about all the same things. You don't agree on all the same fronts. But that's okay, because you need to know, you need to be reminded that in this space, that here in this community, We are a group, we are a tribe of people that are saying, we want to sit with your worldviews. We want to sit with your ideas. We don't get it right every time. We're going to still upset people. We're going to still get it wrong. When it's all said and done, we deeply love you. We deeply love each other. And we look forward to what the moments ahead begin to look like. So, Father, thank you for my friends in this space. Thank you for this room full of amazing people. Thank you for people who take you seriously, who take their formation seriously, who ask really, really good questions, who've learned to embody each other in a beautiful way. God, we love you, and we look forward to the days ahead. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.